Looked like Barry emptied out his truck bed is what it looked like all kinds of stuff that we didn't need to do a retaining wall with. We would give you your paycheck, but we don't want it to look like hush hush money, and they're like, you have rights, but you don't have to give CBI your phone.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode we're going to investigate the possibility of whether there were accessories involved, either knowingly or unknowingly. More about that in a moment. And we're really going to drill down into a article from the Daily Mail dated 27th October 2020. It was actually published 13th of September and then around about 6 weeks later updated. And I will put a link to that article in the description. Don't forget, later today I'll be doing a live at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. If you're not sure what the time is, just put 2 p.m. EST in your browser and it'll give you the time where you are, in your area. And that is, the subject for that will be whether the Morphews were equally yoked or not. And those who know the Chris Watts case know I've covered this before. It is quite early to be covering this territory, but I do think we've got quite a lot of information to draw a couple of inferences to kind of put together quite a good kind of article, a statement, a sense of what those dynamics actually were. So look out for that 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. Okay. Before we get to today's episode, if you haven't subscribed, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. Now, there are a couple of dimensions to get to know Barry, besides from people who might be biased. So, for example, family members, perhaps his own children. If you want to get to know the other side to a person, how can you do that? And so one of the ways to do that is go through, for example, co-workers or neighbors. And so in this case, we get some very interesting information from two Colorado landscapers, and we're going to talk a little bit about them. Now, interestingly, there were rumors circulating, I guess, in September, October, that Barry was actually having an affair with one of these landscapers. We'll get to her in a moment. She's denied the charges, but she is quite an attractive lady. I don't know if that means that someone's having an affair if the person's attractive, but I don't, people are very resistant when you say something like, if you compare someone's wife to somebody else, who's more attractive, people find that very objectionable. But that is how men think. That is how men having an affair think, is they think, wow, you're attractive. They don't necessarily think you're more attractive than my wife, but that dynamic does come into it. And I think it's just human psychology that people think that way, especially criminals in a scenario like this. When Chris Watts had his affair, I think what was constantly pushing him, driving him, was the sense that how attractive he found his mistress and how much more attractive he found her. And of course, it's very objectionable if you're a woman. It's very objectionable if you shenan. It's very objectionable if you're a pregnant woman. It's very objectionable if you're his children. All those things. But this is a true crime channel. We're trying to understand how these perpetrators, usually men, how they think. No one is saying it's justified, it's just how they are thinking. So we're going to get to that, but what I want to deal with first is this question: were there accessories involved? Now, I've highlighted a small section from the text of the article on the cover slides, and it basically deals with Gentile and Puckett, the two individuals helping Barry. They were kind of summoned by him to go to Broomfield, and they were waiting for him at a Broomfield hotel. I believe it was a Holiday Inn. And this was immediately before and I guess after the incident with Suzanne, right? So it was on the morning of May 11th that Barry called to say his wife had gotten attacked, or a mountain lion had got her. So that was his story to them as early as the next day, right? So the two people involved here in terms of helping Barry with his landscaping in Broomfield were Jeff Puckett and Morgan Gentile. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that they are accessories in any way. I'm suggesting, or I'm quoting their statements suggesting that they spoke to people, certainly Morgan did, that may have been accessories either knowingly or unknowingly. And I'll get into that in a moment, kind of an intertextual element. So what happened was they were at the Holiday Inn, and on the morning of May 11th, Barry called, and then Morgan Gentile told the Daily Mail that Barry had said he was going up the mountain to find his wife. And that is already, I think, a misdirection. You know, if you want to find Suzanne, go up the mountain. I don't think that is where she was. Gentile said she and Puckett packed up and drove back to Salida. And this is the part that's interesting. This is the part that I've sort of highlighted. Back in town, and I presume this is Salida, she was approached by two men, both linked to Morphew. Now, I don't know what that means, linked how. Were there other landscapers? Were they sort of, dogs' bodies? What was sort of going on? You know, were they just small level workers? What was sort of the link? Were they somehow family members or something? But in any event, she kind of cryptically says linked to Morphew, and one of them said, quote, "We would give you your paycheck, but we don't want it to look like hush-hush money. You have rights, but you don't have to give the Colorado Bureau of Investigation your phone." That's a pretty direct statement to make. You know, if it was someone that didn't know the circumstances, that didn't know what was kind of going on, in other words, they were unaware, then saying something like hush-hush and don't talk to the CBI, you would imagine they would ask Barry, well, what's that all about? And the fact that they said this suggests that they perhaps knew more and perhaps were involved more than people have appreciated. I think the other thing, just to be realistic about, is the fact that this is published in the Daily Mail. So it's possible that someone is telling a story. It's possible that where there's smoke, there's fire, but it's just something that came up then. Why has it not come up again? And Morgan Gentile seems to have maintained quite a low profile since then. We haven't really heard from her. But apparently she says she spoke to the CBI 5 times and gave them her phone. So it's got a little bit of a Nicole Kessinger feel to it. The fact that this woman is assisting the CBI to the extent that she is. And I don't, if it's true that she spoke to them 5 times, she certainly must have given them a lot of information that they could have worked with. Possibly Barry's habits, possibly Barry's temperament, possibly people in Barry's field of influence, the job sites they were working on, what was normal procedure for these job sites. For example, was it normal for Barry to be working at almost midnight, say, on a Saturday night kind of thing? Was it normal for him to be working alone? She also hands over her phone, right? And she says near to the end of the article that she knew her rights and doesn't have anything to hide. That being said, we haven't really heard from her since then. The other part that's interesting is Barry fired her. So it feels like, if you join the dots, and if the dots that we're joining are kind of legitimate, it feels like Barry didn't want her to talk to the CBI, and because she did talk to them, he fired her. And what you get in this scenario, if it's true, is that Barry was kind of in control. She's sort of working for him, and so in that sense she's dependent on him, and he may have overestimated that relationship, or that dynamic, if you want to put it that way. And so she told the Daily Mail that he fired me because she gave them her phone, because she wasn't staying quiet, and because she was complying with them, right? And then she said, and this was in October, so this is quite a few months ago, something like 6 months ago, even more. She said, I feel like if he was innocent, he would have talked to me. I worked with him every day for a long time. So someone who probably knew him very, very well was this lady. She denies that they were in any kind of relationship. I wonder whether there's some truth to that, meaning maybe it's true that nothing technically happened, but maybe it's also true that, as in the Chris Watts case, they met one another in a work scenario. They were encountering one another perhaps every day, those are her own words, for a long time, and that something developed. Now, something may not have developed with her. Maybe she was just friendly or whatever it is. If you can look at a picture of her on the Daily Mail. I'm not going to put it up here on YouTube, but I think she is quite an attractive woman. And you can also hear her speaking, and she just seems to be quite engaging. There is a Nicole Kessinger element to her in a weird way. She's sort of more, she seems quite down to earth, and there's something about her that is quite charming. If sort of, she seems kind of brusque, someone who will call a spade, right? Let's actually listen to what she said to Fox 21 way back in September.
That's how I got treated through all this, is just like, I'm the other woman, even though I'm not the other woman. I just happen to be a woman.
Just to set the record straight, for those that think you had a relationship with Barry, a sexual relationship, what would you tell people?
Well, I would tell them absolutely no.
Now, that was a video clip from Fox 21. I'll actually put the link in the description as well so you can listen to the whole thing. It's followed by Barry Morphew being on the phone actually, and this was 4 months after the events, after a period of very little information coming out from anybody. Bear in mind, it's a missing person search and there's like no information. And then it comes out in kind of dribs and drabs. So then they called Barry Morphew and asked him about the affair, and he said, you know, that it's not true either. And this is the frustrating thing with true crime, is people may have information, but then it becomes dismissed as rumor, and people don't reach out to legitimate channels and give the information. And you can anonymously give information, and then the information is nevertheless valid, but it depends on the quality of the creator, I guess, that you're communicating with. I'm, for example, a ex-magazine journalist. I've written for newspapers and so on, and so you know how to deal with sources, but not everybody does. And so what happens is people communicate perhaps on social media, and then it just becomes dismissive as rumor. It's difficult to say in this case what the situation is, but the fact that the CBI spoke to her 5 times seems to suggest there was quite a lot there, that she may have known Barry really, really well. Now, it is possible that she's telling the truth and that something perhaps was developing, possibly from Barry's side. Perhaps Barry thought something was going on, got some ideas. That does happen. And she was just kind of a friendly person, and then Barry kind of took things too far, kind of thing. In the Chris Watts case, you had a situation where the mistress probably wasn't comfortable with Chris Watts being married, even though they were having an affair, and Chris Watts then took matters into his own hands, in a way on behalf of the mistress, but when the mistress found out about it, she really didn't want to be involved, and we've never heard from her really again. This is in spite of all the conspiracies that people think. Now, you could have had a similar situation in this case, except perhaps the quote-unquote mistress learned from the Chris Watts case and said, look, I'm not going to get involved with you until you get divorced. And and then again it's a situation of, well, how do you fast track a divorce, right? And perhaps Suzanne was thinking, let's get divorced after we sell the house, or after one of the kids has gone to college, or something like that. What's also interesting that is acknowledged in this is that the reporter says not just that she was having an affair, that it was a sexual relationship. One wonders where that comes from. And then also the information that she says that the case has broken up her family, this was just after 4 months, also forced her to relocate and is keeping her from finding employment. That makes one wonder what is really going on here, because if she wasn't having an affair, then surely it would be easy to explain to her family. Maybe not, maybe not. But of course, if she was having an affair, then her family especially would know about this, and an affair would legitimately break up a family. So the breaking up of a family may be a case of action speaking louder than words. Her relocating may also be a case of something like that, and who knows whether somebody helped her with that relocation. And her not getting a job may be part of just keeping a low profile. It's difficult to know in a situation like this, because you really do have a situation where rumors in social media can be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than than reality. We see that with Nicole Kessinger. We get the feeling that she's been forced to relocate, that I don't know if the case has broken up her family, but it certainly moved her probably somewhere else, and has probably also perhaps to some extent jeopardized her career prospects. And that's the case of a woman the authorities consider innocent, right? So we don't know what the level of involvement is here. But the part that I think a lot of people are missing, they look at this guy Puckett and Gentile, and they talk about the chlorine, but who were those two men that were linked, quote unquote, linked to Barry, who came with the sort of message, that we don't want you talking to the CBI, and don't give them your phone, and all that kind of thing. So I mentioned earlier that you can have a scenario where you're sort of accessory without knowing it, which is to say you're not really an accessory. And an example of that we see in the Morphew case, where after Barry and his mistress, Crystal Kenny, incinerated the remains of Kelsey Bereth on the driveway, actually within sight of his mother, apparently was in the house at the time. After that happened, once the whole inferno was ash, Patrick Frazee had his little laborers, young guys. I think they were around about 20 odd years old, but very young men. He had them come and help clean up the sort of dust up the ash and pick up all the remnants of this bonfire. And it was things like metal staples in wood and just all the debris. And it was quite an elaborate thing, but a lot of the debris had also melted. Some of it was plastic, and it melted and kind of fused with the gravel and formed a kind of a substrate. But in any event, these men who previously would help Patrick, get rid of other animal carcasses that he was possibly burning, like reindeer antlers or whatever it was, they felt they were just doing the same thing, right? And ultimately, when forensic examiners were studying the scene with little hammers and tools and scrapers and brushes and everything, they found one tiny fragment in the very last scoop of the day. So they spent hours going through all of this sort of slab of kind of melted plastic and just tiny little residues of the ash that hadn't been cleaned up. And they found one tiny piece of tooth fragment, and that's one of the best pieces of evidence of Kelsey Bereth that they ever found. And it was never DNA proved that it was Kelsey Bereth, but it was proved to be a fragment of a human female, based on I think a forensic anthropologist. And so, but in that case, those men that were involved probably didn't know what they were cleaning up. And so from our perspective, they were helping Patrick Frazee, but they weren't accessories in the sense that they knew they were helping him in terms of disposing of evidence, right? Is that clear? So in this particular case, it's difficult to know for sure, but we do know what these men apparently said, and it just makes it difficult to imagine that they didn't know something. And if they did know something, what was in it for them? Was the money? Was the what was the whole thing? What's really interesting in this Daily Mail article is you get a very colloquial, on-the-ground feeling about what was going on at the time, which is so precious and so important in true crime. You want to get a sense of, on the ground, what was going on at the time that this event happened. And so she refers to a construction site off County Road 105, east of Salida, the same area where investigators spent 3 days searching for Suzanne on May 21st and 23rd. So the information she was giving them, they would then respond to. And then she says, quote, "He was acting really weird about the beach area. And I was like, Barry, what's up? He seemed stressed. He definitely seemed weird on Saturday." And then she'd agreed to work in that area for the day, and I guess Puckett had as well. But then Barry dismissed her from the job early at 11 a.m. And that gives you a sense that this change of plans seems to show that he's possibly making things up as he's going along. He's perhaps panicking. He's thinking things through perhaps in a way that he hasn't before. And so changing what is going on is definitely picking up or sending up red flags. And so this is an example of her saying something colloquially that gives you a sense of what is going on, gives you a sense of Barry. She quotes him saying, "He said he had to go make the wife happy, the wife. Do some hiking or biking," she said. "And I found out like later that day that he was in town all day." And, you know, her saying, "and I found out like later that day," again, it just sounds a bit like Nicole Kessinger, doesn't it? Then she said she heard that Barry was out shopping by himself. What was he shopping for? Was he shopping for chlorine? Was he shopping for, what was he shopping for? And then the article goes on to refer to a retaining wall in the Broomfield job included only Gentile and Barry in the original plan. She also talks about the plan for this job, that the day changed. They were supposed to originally go at the end of April, then the plans changed, and they then were going to do the project on the 1st of May, and then the weekend of May 10th. And she said she was surprised when Barry called her asking her to assemble a crew. Now, you kind of get the sense, was Barry getting his information about another case somewhere else, and that was making him think, okay, I better not do this, I better not do that, right? And if you think about it just in a general sense, Barry and Morgan Gentile were sort of located around a Holiday Inn, a hotel room, around about the time of Mother's Day. And what about the story that he was going on a volunteer firefighter course or something like that? What happened to that? So it is a bit suspicious that technically a youngish woman, a co-worker, was at a hotel room in Broomfield, and Barry was there as well, ostensibly to do a job, right? It is something that is a bit strange on Mother's Day. She goes on to say, last minute he changed everything. In fact, he called me that Sunday, Mother's Day, and he was really frantic, really didn't sound like himself. I hung up the phone and thought he just had the worst night of his life. Even so, Morgan Gentile picked up Jeffrey Puckett and they headed to Broomfield, and ultimately they didn't really do any work, so it's quite strange. At 6:10, and this is in the Fox 21 news article, Morgan Gentile said Barry said they had been up there all day, like getting the job ready for us. But then he said there was a family emergency. I think it's the same words Chris Watts used. And there's also tools involved here. He leaves tools behind at the hotel. And then she says, but we didn't have the tools that we needed. It looked like Barry had emptied out his truck and all kinds of stuff that we didn't need to do a retaining wall. So it seems like Barry, it's possible, isn't it, that Barry may have hidden the disposal in the supposed emergency work, or the at the drop of the hat work that was supposed to be done that weekend. So you get the sense almost that he conjured this job that weekend as a sort of cover for the disposal, right? Because he didn't take what he needed to do the work in the first place. But then he may have panicked that, if people found out about this, they would be wondering where he went and who was there, kind of thing. And so that's perhaps why he made up the story about the volunteer firefighter thing. What is quite interesting and perhaps quite unfortunate is you have these rumors going out into the ether, but then law enforcement don't really deal with them. So you don't have law enforcement really coming out, not as far as I know, and saying, that whole thing about the volunteer firefighter, that is not true. And so there's not like rumor control. And what that then does is it gives the control over the narrative to Barry or to the rumor mongers, put it that way. And from a perspective of people in true crime, the true crime community, that is frustrating. And we've heard the sheriff in this case saying, look, this is our strategy. We don't get involved. We don't say anything. We keep our cards close to our chest. But it does then create this this impression that things are in a particular way when they're not, because it's like silence is consent. The fact that the authorities are saying nothing implies that they don't know much when they do know much. And it seems like they're waiting for the suspect to overplay their hand, right? There's also a third employee mentioned in the Fox 21 news article, Cassidy Cordova. She was hired to work also on that Broomfield job, but Cordova, unlike Gentile, has declined all interview requests. And then she also sent a message talking about rumors that are blasphemous and so on and so on. So quite a lot of intrigue around, was an affair going on, but then there's also this thing of, could there be these other individuals that could have been accessories? What do you guys think?
Everybody's out there saying, oh, he's got a girlfriend and he's having affairs. Where is it? There's nobody. There's never been another love in my life since 1988.
That's a clip from Fox 21 News. Something else that is mentioned in that clip is that Barry left tools in a hotel cart. And what that suggests to me is that possibly if tools were transported into the hotel room, well, what more than that? Thank you for listening once again. Don't miss the live tonight it's tonight for me. It's this afternoon for you at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be talking about whether Barry and Suzanne were equally yoked. So don't miss that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys then.